As Xi Jinping and Joe Biden discuss the future of China-U.S. relations, are we finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel?
From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hi there, and a very warm welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The leaders of China and the United States are finally meeting, virtually though, from each other's capitals. Washington sent mixed signals before the summit, with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying the U.S. is considering lowering tariffs on Chinese goods, a major legacy of Trump-era trade war against China. On the other hand, Washington has been playing fire and paying lip service to the One China principle regarding Taiwan. What will be the chemistry between the two men who knew each other all too well, spending long hours together as vice presidents in 2011 and 2012? Will the meeting set a new tone for the great power competition?
当前啊，中美发展都处在关键阶段。
China and the U.S. are at critical stages of development. The global village of humanity faces multiple challenges. As the world's two largest economies and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and the U.S. need to increase communication and cooperation, each run their domestic affairs well, and at the same time, shoulder their share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development. This is the shared desire of the people of the two countries and around the world in the joint mission of Chinese and American leaders.
I'm happy we had found time to meet, and I look forward to a candid and forthright discussions like all the discussions we've had thus far. Seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. And it seems to me we need to establish some common sense guardrails to be clear and honest where we disagree and work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change. How our bilateral relationship evolves seems to me will have a profound impact not only on our countries, but quite frankly, the rest of the world.
Now for the latest on the China-U.S. summit, we're joined by CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King in Washington, D.C. In Beijing, we have Charles Liu, co-founder of Impact Asia Capital. Also, Einar Tangen, political and economic affairs commentator. Great to have all of you here, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Nathan King. Thank you for doing this. I know it has been a long day for you. The two leaders have been meeting for nearly 3 hours. What has been the latest?
Yeah, the fact that they have been meeting for so long, Wang Guan, good to see you again, is, I think, encouraging. In fact, they just come back from a break. So if they just had a break, it means we're not going to be done within the next 10 minutes, unless there's a serious diplomatic breach. And as you know, there's been a lot of work going into the summit, albeit virtual. And let's face it, this is not just the heads of state, but also all the main principals who have been talking together over the last 10 months of the Biden presidency. And even though there's been only 2 phone calls between the 2 biggest economy leaders, there has been more and more communication, only look at what happened in Glasgow, etc., between the 2 countries. And the fact that you said that Janet Yellen was suggested that tariffs or some tariffs may be lifted is something we've been hearing in Washington for a while. There is a lack of China policy on the economic front, but they've been taking it slowly, which I think would definitely help, because obviously a lot of the Biden trade policy is a continuation with allies of the Trump administration. So I think there's some good news going to come out of this. The question is, though, look, obviously trade is very important, the economy is very important, but the finger pointing over COVID really damaged relations. And also this, as you said, the one China policy, just paying lip service, is it dead, despite the fact that the White House has sort of been reassuring rhetorically? In reality, it doesn't look like that, does it? So, you know, if we can get some movement on trade, but Taiwan is, I think, as you know, a red line, that the U.S. has not always realized how important it is, or perhaps under-realized. So perhaps we'll see a way forward on that as well. Climate set the tone in Glasgow for COP26. We'll see what comes out of that in terms of details of their joint statement moving forward on the technologies of the future to tackle methane and stuff. But so far, what I'm hearing coming out of the meeting is pretty positive. And let's face it, you know, these people know each other, not just Joe Biden and President Xi, but obviously Janet Yellen, Liu He, Yang Jiechi, and Wang Yi as well, and the others.
Yeah, you know, Nathan, people always say all politics are local. So can you give us a sense of the town you're in, Washington, D.C., when you think about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill Joe Biden just signed, the inflation over there? How does that all play into Joe Biden's China policy calculation?
See, Wang Guan, I'm glad you're in Beijing because you've been in Washington and you know how this town works. And absolutely right, all politics are local. In fact, just 3.5 hours before this summit, Joe Biden triumphantly signed the infrastructure bill that you were referring to, about $1.2 trillion, $550 billion of new spending over the next 10 years, which in a briefing, they said puts Biden in a stronger position going into the virtual summit with Xi because of the amount of infrastructure that China's done. It shows that the U.S. is continuing the strategic competition and won't have the 21st century led by China. So they're saying this to their own people. And in fact, Joe Biden's getting on a plane in the next few hours, going around the country selling this. So in terms of the national perspective, Joe Biden, this idea of intense competition with China is very much part of selling it to American people. And the problem is that creates this sort of conflict feeling in Washington, a Cold War mentality. I mean, let's face it, even officials are openly talking about containment of China here in the Biden administration. That would have been unthought of 5-10 years ago.
Nathan King, thank you so much for doing this. Take care, man. Hope to see you again. Come back soon. Einar, we've heard from our correspondent Nathan King from the statements and also the body language of the two leaders. What's your reading of this summit so far?
Well, it was very interesting. Xi was very open, relaxed. I was talking about friendship, cooperation, how they can come together. Biden was a little bit more closed, talking about guardrails, competition. You noticed he had his hands up, a little bit more defensive.
But also reading off a script.
Yeah, and reading off a script. And it really shows the difference of where they are. And your comment and Nathan's about this being domestic, absolutely. 60% of the United States is concerned about inflation. They're not happy with Joe Biden. His polls are way down. So this is an opportunity for him. Janet Yellen has been preparing the ground for quite some time. She's been joined in the chorus by Catherine Tai, who's kind of opened the door to have 500 of these tariffs reviewed. Corporate America has geared up. They sent eight of the major business organizations sent a letter saying, listen, it's time to put this away. And you just look at the cold hard realities. Donald Trump said these tariffs were going to make America great again, that they were going to tame the deficit. They did not. It has gone exactly the opposite way. So at this point, it's a failure. It's time to move on. Let's see if that's the impetus for other things. I agree with Nathan, though. I don't see much changing on Taiwan.
Yeah, inflation in October in the United States has been hitting over 6%. That is quite high by all accounts. Charles, let me go to you. Both sides have been playing down expectations of this summit. Saying there will not be a lot of deliverables, tangible progress. What's your reading of the summit?
Absolutely. I don't think we should expect anything substantive. But the summit took place because the U.S. needed it, because Joe Biden needed it. Now they're admitting finally that the tariffs has really harmed the American people, American consumers and American corporations. But why didn't he lift it when he took over in January and continued to use the tariff as a way of bashing China? I think this is the key, really, to what he's trying to do, is if you lift the tariffs, it will soften the blow of inflation immediately by at least a little bit. I think he's really thinking about domestic politics. Now, all of these other things, South China Sea, Taiwan, Xinjiang, and Hong Kong, much of this is really political theater and show, with the exception of Taiwan, of course. Taiwan is of strategic importance, not only to China, it's more than emotional, it's strategic. But for the U.S., can you imagine if Taiwan was reunited with China? 60% of the world's semiconductors will be controlled by the Chinese government or indirectly through the Chinese market. That's something that may cause a problem. So I think the Taiwan issue is probably, this is more important, the strategic side of semiconductors is more important than all the pitch about democracy, freedom, liberty, and all that. I think South China Sea, China's relationship with Southeast Asia has come along. Xinjiang is fake news. It's proven to be fake news. Hong Kong is now in recovery to go on the right path. So I think, you know, the real thing here is afterwards, probably quite soon, they will make announcements on reduction of tariffs and probably lifting of tariffs altogether, because he needs to address the inflation issue and he needs to address it very quickly. But I don't think just lifting the tariffs are going to do it. It involves a lot of other variables and factors like supply chain and shipping and lacking labor in this whole supply chain.
I know you had strong ties with Taiwan previously. You know, we'll talk about the issue of Taiwan soon, but getting back to the issue of reducing tariffs, how likely do you think is it to happen coming out of this summit? And also, can you give us a bit background? Why are the two sides doing this?
Well, China has considered it totally ridiculous to start the trade war. Why would you want to harm yourself and harm your competitor as well, of course? China was against it from day one. And President Trump imposed it, and it was very harsh all around the Chinese trade area. But ultimately, it's admitted by Janet Yellen and all senior trade representatives in the U.S. now that the tariffs really harmed the U.S. much more than it harmed China. And I think this will be addressed as the core substantive issue in the bilateral discussion. Now, of course, you have to do it in such a way that you both don't lose face, especially from the U.S. side. You do this big song and dance about using tariffs to even out trade between China and the United States. But now you pull back and drop it all. It's pretty embarrassing. Now, how much will it really help inflation? It's hard to say. It's hard to say because there are too many other variables bringing about inflation now.
There are a whole lot of variables going into the issue of inflation. Let's talk about the summit itself. As we speak, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping are meeting virtually from each other's capitals. This is the first meeting in over 300 days.
Yes,
the
longest
period for the new leaders to meet each other. If you think about it, going back 20 years, 30 years maybe.
It's a real signal. The U.S. has been looking for an earlier meeting. There's been reticence on China's side. And, but there has been some daylight. And I think the reason that you're seeing it now is not only because of the climate change agreement, but also you had Jake Sullivan, who's not terribly friendly to China, and also Catherine Tsai admit that they're not going to change China. This is the first time an American administration has openly said that there is no chance of doing that. Also, one of the factors, and I agree with Charles, there is going to be this kind of face-saving way of getting it, and I think it's going to be the phase one. They're going to say, hey, listen, we want you to buy more American products. And they say the easiest way to do that is drop the tariffs so that American products are actually useful. And despite the labor problems in the U.S., right, the fact is that 245,000 well-paying jobs, I mean, these $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 per person were lost because of this trade war. And there's a chance to get 145,000 of those back. And this isn't flipping hamburgers for $15. This is real money.
Yeah, I was in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was in Michigan, interviewing farmers, industrial workers there. The tariffs are hurting them. They want trade, not just aid. Let's look at some specifics coming out of the summit so far. We've been talking about the summit between Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping. taking place virtually. Xi Jinping called Joe Biden my old friend from his opening statement, and Joe Biden reciprocated by saying that, to be honest with you, I should start more formally, even though you and I have never been that formal. Obviously referring to their long hours together as vice presidents in 2011 and 2012. Joe Biden also said he wanted to, establish some common sense guardrails and to be frank and honest about disagreements. And Joe Biden also said this. He said competition should not veer into conflict, just simple, straightforward competition. Charles, what do you think Joe Biden meant when he said, competition should not veer into conflict, just simple, straightforward competition?
Well, I think this is already softening up from what was said months ago. That it was a lot more aggressive than competition. I think what it is that the initiative, once again, is very clear of wanting to have the head-to-head meeting between the heads of state. Is initiative comes from the U.S. side. It didn't come from China. Because for China, why should we meet with you when you're doing China bashing all over the world? The vilification of China has been aggressively pursued by the U.S. over the last 6 months. So I think the positioning is really quite clear. From China's side, let's be friends. We can do things together. We can collaborate. We can do win-win. From the U.S. side, it's very difficult to step down from that high horse of China bashing that's lasted for quite some time, starting with the Trump era, and all of a sudden move to real collaboration. But I think there's no question real collaboration is what this world needs, not only on trade but also on climate change, absolutely. I think the fact that they know each other well, and the fact that, as Einar described, interestingly, that Xi is open and very relaxed, and Biden is somewhat more formal and a little bit tighter, is the domestic pressure that he's faced. In China's case, over 90% of the population were very happy about how the Chinese government handled coronavirus. It has the support of the people. But the U.S. is quite polarized. The U.S. economy is not in such great shape. And there is inflation. There are other things to come. And there are possibilities of a real stagflation next year. So I think for President Biden, relationship with China or having a battle with China is probably pretty far from what he has in mind.
Yeah, Charles, I will ask Einar the same question later on. But Charles, do you think this meeting may eventually prove historic in setting the tone for China-U.S. great power competition? I mean, to make sure that it is one of benign competition instead of a race to the bottom?
I think I don't think that will happen. I don't think this will be a turning point, because U.S. is so polarized, and the politicians are not statesmen. They're really looking at the next round of elections or votes for the midterm elections. What if, unfortunately for President Biden, the midterm elections, he loses the Senate and the House? What can he do? If that happens, it's another lame duck. It's another all talk and do nothing show for the next couple of years. And China likely is once again going to be a target of the attack. I don't think strategically there is a view that is truly sophisticated about how to deal with big power relationships in Washington.
Einar, what do you think?
Joe Biden is a legislator. He's a person who's used to getting in a room and making a deal. And I think he's very good at it. And this is why he wanted to, have a one-on-one with Xi. He really believes that, his experience can lead him to get to somewhere where he wants to be. It's not going to be everything he wants. It's not going to be everything the other person wants. But he really believes that. Unfortunately, as he has shown with AUKUS, as he has shown with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He doesn't always consider the people outside the room, how things are going to be taken. And there's this kind of lack of overall vision and strategy that Nathan referred to earlier. What is the strategy economically with China? No one in Washington knows, so therefore I'm going to assume no one does.
When asked about the tangible progress of Washington's policy against China on Fareed Zakaria's GPS on CNN, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, defended Biden's China policy, saying that the success of this policy has been the ability to rally the allies across the Atlantic and its partners in sending pressure against China. That has been the cornerstone of Biden's China policy.
Well, you've been in Washington. You understand spin when you hear it. I mean, the facts are very clear. As Charles pointed out, 95% of the costs of tariffs are on U.S. citizens. 5% are on Chinese businesses. So you tell me who's winning that. You start looking at the deficit, the trade deficit. It's through the roof.
But the caucus, the alliance with Australia and New Zealand, could be deterrents for Beijing.
Well, it's at some point Australia is going to wake up and understand that the U.S. has been telling them not to trade with China, but through phase one, telling China to trade with the U.S. So in essence, the U.S. is eating Australia's lunch. And at some point, a politician there will wake up and say, wait a second, we're supporting them while they're undercutting us economically. And that will be the end of it. Remember, this is politics in a democracy. Democracies change. So many of the things we're talking about, setting the tone for great power relations, etc., these currently aren't the people to do it. Xi is. He's willing. But he doesn't have people who have the kind of statesman-like stature and understanding and vision to do the same.
Right, let's talk about the issue of Taiwan. Charles, let me go to you. You have been very attached to Taiwan. You spent many years over there. How do you look at the current administration's posture and policy towards Taiwan, basically paying lip service to the One China policy?
I think it's a reflection of their weakness over the Taiwan issue or over Asian issues in general, in comparison to the rising forces of China. Because in terms of Taiwan, strategic ambiguity works if you can be in a position of force. Strategic clarity is actually reflecting your weakness. What they're doing with strategic clarity is to push China, push, to force China to make a wrong move. Not only have they done it, but they've also put Taiwan's government into the same track, which is really disastrous for them. Because ultimately, there's no strategic interest for the U.S. in terms of Taiwan, with the exception of using it to contain China. If you can't contain China anymore, this is all for nothing. It's all for naught. Now, I think the only thing, purely from a business perspective, that they will try to do is to hollow out Taiwan of its semiconductor business. The first step was to ask for all data from TSMC and from Samsung, of course, and the others. That's just the first step, but there could be further steps. But I think that's also for naught, because you cannot transfer all of this to Wisconsin. You can't even put an assembly plant together in Wisconsin, let alone a semiconductor fab. So it's, sorry, Einar, I talk about Wisconsin.
It's quite all right.
Einar is from Wisconsin, so so I think in terms of Taiwan, the older generation still has this very strong ties to the mainland China. Shanghai, for example, my elementary school in Taiwan has a 朋友圈, a group in Shanghai in the hundreds of people. That's the older generation. The middle generation of businessmen, 80% of their business, 80% have business ties in one way or another with China. So they're totally bound by bloodline of the economy and commerce to China. And young people in Taiwan, those who want to start a business, the startups, use the Chinese market as a market base, not the 23 million in Taiwan. So I think, you know, the days of reunification are probably a lot closer than some people would think.
Well, that would be the hope of many. Charles, you know, you lived on the island of Taiwan, now on the Chinese mainland. You studied in the United States, spending half of your life over there. Do you think the American public really get the issue of Taiwan? You know, when the narratives used to be, you know, the two Chinas, quote unquote, the Red China versus Free China back in the Cold War era, now coming into the new century, basically people have been talking about Taiwan and China, you know,
Yes.
一边一国, right? So
Yeah.
the narratives has been really manipulated by the elites in the West.
It is manipulated absolutely by the elite and by the media as well, following certain pathways given by U.S. and some European leaders. But I don't think it really makes a difference, because this is something we have to accept. Most Americans are not very sophisticated. The level of education, the level of their international knowledge base, all of this, to believe you can inject things into your vein to kill the virus, and then to use Clorox to rinse your mouth to kill the virus, and people actually go out and do it, shows the level of sophistication and basic science knowledge is so lacking in the U.S. I don't think it really matters what they think about Taiwan. I don't think it really makes much of a difference. U.S. is not going to fight over Taiwan. It's not going to conduct a war over Taiwan. They may try to get Japanese to do it, but Japanese won't be so stupid to do it. The only stupid ones who might get involved are the Australians. Sorry.
Well, Einar, what do you think?
Well, Charles, how do you really feel about this? In any event, no, I agree with a large part of it, but I think there's something else at stake, and that is the U.S. is willing to sacrifice Taiwan as a PR card. And by that I mean they won't want to get China to do something so that they can then claim that China is this aggressive power that needs to be contained, and this is why we're getting everyone together. And you've seen that. I mean, there were reports coming out bizarrely saying, oh, there's nothing we could do if China took a few of these little islands that are somehow between Taiwan and the mainland. It was a very bizarre thing. It was like, oh, you could take those islands and there's nothing we could do. I mean, you know, General Milley said when he was testifying that he had called his Chinese counterparts to tell them, look, we're not going to use nukes, all right? And the response he had gotten is are you trying to, you know, goad us into a war over Taiwan? And this is where, you know, the heightened tensions were. So obviously it's on both sides of the radar that Taiwan is merely a pawn in a great power relationship. But I really think that this is an area like World War I where you could sleepwalk into a war, a conflict, by accident, not by design.
All right, Einar Tangen and Charles Liu, thank you both so very much, and thank you for your analysis on the summit by Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping currently taking place. They're meeting virtually from each other's capital. And thank you for watching The Hub on CGTN. Get in touch with me and our team on social media if you have any suggestions. Bye for now.